If you remember in our last session, we talked about the number of containers on container ships, and we calculated over 800,000 containers were stuck from ports from Vancouver to Ensenada. It's actually worse, so we're not going to go through that today in the supply chain world. But what we are going to talk about in the supply chain world is what's going on in the world of warehousing. So goods typically will move from a supplier or from a raw material producer into some form of a warehouse, and then they go to manufacturers and oftentimes in warehouses after that. Some of the warehouses are actually in the retail stores, and if one thinks about products on shelves in retail stores, that's in a form of warehousing. And like all history, global supply chain issues tend to repeat themselves. If you take a look back in the period of 1940, roughly up to 2020, or about 80 years, you'll notice that automation really took enormous leaps. In fact, it was kind of a version of Moore's Law, except it took about every 3 years, the productivity just about doubled in manufacturing organizations, particularly from 1950 after World War II, because we had a lot of engineers thinking about how to make things better, how to produce things better. And then there was also an enormous amount of pent-up demand. So we saw about every 3 years, we saw about a doubling of productivity in the average manufacturing company. And that was mostly the result of automation that was created by manufacturing and industrial and process engineers. And so what's really interesting is when you take a look at the state of manufacturing, you see today automated equipment in manufacturing companies, robotics. We have clients where they spend the day shift setting up the machines, and then they go home and the machines produce all night long on the second and the third shift. So they have 8 hours of setup time to set up the machines, and the rest of the 24 hours is actually the robots and the automation producing product from the prior setups. So we're continue to see just enormous growth in productivity as a result of automation. Even last year, in the pandemic year, factory productivity increased over the previous year. To me, that's just amazing. And we still got product out. Today, we struggle with some labor and some talent shortages. But in the pandemic year, we still were able to improve productivity. Now, where the automation experts have set their sights is in warehousing. Warehousing has jokingly been said to be the second oldest industry in the history of the world. Warehousing is providing time and place utility of materials and products for later downstream consumption. The benefits of automation and warehousing is that it reduces labor. And the reduction of labor isn't about cost. It's really more about availability, and it's about training of warehousing professionals. So in a warehouse, the 5 major functions are: you receive material, you then put material away, you store material, then you pick material out of the warehouse, and then you consolidate it and distribute it to either internal uses or to customers or consumers or downstream distribution intermediaries. Well, almost all of that has been driven by labor since the beginning of time. Now there's a new breed of intelligent robots that are being produced by companies like Vecna Robots and Sarcos Robotics and others. And these robots now have the ability to independently and autonomously go down an aisle of racks and pick material out. So in other words, they can run 24 hours a day without a break, without lunch, and all they need is a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of battery charging periodically. And so Gartner has done some studies on this recently and has reported that there's really a renaissance in automation that's happening as a result of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and it's being attached to the warehousing industry. So a repeat of what happened in manufacturing globally is going to happen now in warehousing, and it's already started. The only difference is that one of the main reasons for implementing robots in factories was to actually reduce costs. And that's not really the case in warehousing. The real reason is the unavailability of talent, the expansion and the growth. If you take a look at the amount of warehouse and space just in the last 12 years alone, warehousing space in North America has tripled. That's a result of the Amazon effect and other things. What we saw in manufacturing from roughly 1950 to 2020 is we saw direct labor and manufacturing jobs going down from about 32% of the total workforce to roughly 2020 being about 6% of the total workforce. But we're going to see that happen in the distribution industry, but in a fraction, probably about 25% of the time. That means in the next 10 to 15 years, most warehouse jobs in the put away, in the picking areas and the distribution areas will be automated by artificial intelligent, machine learning, autonomous, mobile, probably electric, although hydrogen might be an issue, robots. And distribution jobs are going to literally disappear. What this means for people in those roles is that if you work in a warehouse, this is just not good news for you. If you're a consumer, this means even better customer service long term, because the warehouses will be able to run 24 hours a day. In some cases, even you could run some of them even lights out probably. So you'll end up with better, faster service. So the Amazon effect will actually be the multiplied Amazon effect. So we should expect that this will drive huge customer service opportunities, but it's also going to drive some societal changes. So if you don't have a college education, or you don't have a craftsman skill set, or you have children that are thinking they don't want to get either of those, then there's going to be some societal issues that are going to happen from that. So there it is. The next big revolution in supply chain is going to be an automation of all these huge, enormous, and ever multiplying distribution centers and warehouses. With that,